I want to give you a personal testimony of a savage storm that I went through. I have debated for months whether to tell this personal story of crisis to my church and the national.
For decades, he preached with unshakable certainty, a man of bold convictions, bold politics, and even bolder prophecy. But now, in a moment of raw honesty, Pastor John Hagee has revealed something that could reshape everything we thought we knew about him. How did a small-town boy from Texas rise to lead one of the largest churches in the nation? And what has changed after a lifetime of triumphs, controversies, and deeply personal battles? What could prompt a man known for absolute answers to suddenly step into a moment of profound reflection? Is this a shift in belief, a crisis of faith, or the final chapter of a preacher confronting the truth he once refused to see? Join us as we explore the confession no one expected. John Hagee grew up in Baytown, Texas, in a home where faith shaped everyday life. Born on April 12, 1940, he was raised by a father who served as a devoted minister, and family evenings often centered around reading and living out the teachings of the Bible. Those early moments left a deep mark on him, planting the conviction that he was meant to serve, a calling that would guide him from small-town roots to national prominence. In school, Hagee stood out for his determination and strong academic drive. After graduating high school, he went on to Trinity University in San Antonio, earning a Bachelor of Science degree, followed by a Master's in Education from the University of North Texas. His education strengthened both his intellect and his spiritual devotion, preparing him for the ministry he felt destined to pursue. His pastoral journey began in 1966 when he founded a small church in San Antonio. What started modestly soon grew into a thriving congregation under his leadership. By 1975, he established Cornerstone Church, which would become one of the largest churches in the country, with more than 22,000 members and a vast campus serving as both a worship space and a community hub beyond the pulpit. Hagee expanded his reach through John Hagee Ministries, broadcasting his sermons across hundreds of radio and television stations. He also created Christians United for Israel, QFI, a major pro-Israel organization that reflected his strong alignment between faith and political belief. Across decades of triumphs, controversies, and challenges, Hagee's influence has stretched far beyond his church, establishing him as one of the most recognized and outspoken figures in modern Christianity. John Hagee has long been more than a pastor. He has become a political figure, a prophetic voice, and a central player in some of the most heated religious and social debates of the past few decades. His unwavering conservative stance has shaped his image as a bold evangelist who refuses to back down. But that same boldness has pulled him into controversy again and again. One of the most debated aspects of his career is his use of biblical prophecy to interpret world events. In his 2006 book, Jerusalem Countdown, he warned that Iran would trigger a nuclear conflict foretold in Scripture. Supporters viewed his message as divine foresight. Critics accused him of spreading fear and fueling hostility toward Islamic nations. More backlash followed. In 2008, Hagee sparked outrage by suggesting the Holocaust played a role in God's plan to establish Israel. Though he meant to honor Israel's founding, many found the statement deeply offensive, arguing it minimized the suffering of millions. It damaged his reputation and strained long-standing alliances. His firm positions on social issues, opposing same-sex marriage, rejecting LGBTQ+ rights, and condemning abortion, have made him a target for activists who see him as out of step with modern values. These controversies have cost him allies and complicated his standing in political and religious circles. Yet despite the criticism, his followers view these very conflicts as proof of his courage. To them, Hagee is a man willing to speak uncomfortable truths, no matter the backlash. But behind the fiery sermons and the public battles lies another story. one shaped by personal struggles the world has rarely seen. What moments pushed him to the edge? What private trials did he face beyond the spotlight? Those answers reveal a side of John Hagee few have ever known. John Hagee may be known for building one of the largest churches in America, but behind that success were some of the hardest seasons of his life. As his ministry grew, so did the challenges that tested his faith, his resilience, and even his identity as a leader. In 1975, his marriage to Martha Downing ended, a devastating blow for a pastor in a conservative community. Divorce carried a heavy stigma, and the backlash was immediate. Many questioned his credibility. Some in his own church turned against him. His ministry nearly collapsed under the weight of public judgment, and people wondered whether he could ever regain the trust he had lost, but Hagee refused to let failure define him. He rebuilt his life and later married Diana Castro, whom he often described as his greatest source of strength. She became not only his wife, but his closest partner in ministry, helping him find confidence again and pushing him forward in his calling. With her support, he began a new chapter, one that ultimately deepened his faith. Still, the pressure didn't end there. Building Cornerstone Church into a massive congregation brought immense expectations. Leading thousands meant carrying the burden of being strong, steady, and spiritual at all times. There were moments when the weight felt overwhelming, yet Hagee never walked away. He stayed committed to preaching, guiding, and standing firm, even when privately he wrestled with doubt. Looking back, Hagee often reflects on those trials as his greatest teachers. They taught him patience, humility, and the truth that faith is not about having every answer, but trusting God when the path is unclear. His struggles also gave him deeper compassion for others facing their own pain. Today, he no longer hides those difficult seasons. Instead, he speaks openly about them. The once unshakable image of a pastor has softened into someone more human, more vulnerable, and to many more relatable. He reminds his followers that even spiritual leaders face uncertainty, but that faith survives when you refuse to give up on God. To his supporters, Hagee's hardships are proof of his resilience. They see him as a man who has endured adversity and emerged stronger in his walk with God, a pastor whose life story has inspired millions. But now, something has shifted. What caused a man known for bold certainty to step into introspection? Did years of trials reshape his beliefs? Or has his faith evolved in ways no one expected? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what does this new revelation mean for the legacy of John Hagee? John Hagee's moment of truth. Earlier this year, during a Sunday service, John Hagee did something no one in his congregation expected. For decades, he had been the forceful, confident voice of evangelical Christianity, a pastor known for certainty, conviction, and bold declarations. People came that morning expecting another fiery sermon. Instead, they heard a quiet, vulnerable man. When Hagee stepped up to speak, his tone was different. Gone was the usual authority. In its place was reflection, even humility. He began by admitting that a lifetime of studying Scripture had taught him something surprising. "I have spent my entire life seeking and interpreting the truth of the Bible," he said. "But sometimes we must accept that parts of God's plan are simply beyond human understanding." The sanctuary fell silent. This was the same preacher who had spent years confidently linking prophecy to world events, the man people looked to for clear answers. And yet here he was, acknowledging uncertainty. Hagee went on to say that his relentless search for absolute truth had sometimes blinded him to something deeper. The mystery at the heart of faith. "For years I tried to explain every detail," he continued, "but faith isn't always about answers. Sometimes it's about accepting the unknown, trusting that God knows even when we don't." For many, the moment was powerful. They saw a pastor who, after decades in ministry, was finally revealing his human side, someone who wrestled with doubt just like they did. One attendee said, "I've never felt so connected to him. It reminded me that even strong leaders face uncertainty." But others were unsettled. Hagee's unwavering confidence had been a stabilizing force for years. Hearing him speak of uncertainty left some feeling adrift. "We counted on him for clarity," one congregant said. "Now he's asking us to embrace questions. That's not easy." Whether comforting or concerning, one thing was undeniable. This was a turning point, a moment that raised new questions about faith, certainty, and the evolving journey of one of Christianity's most influential and complicated voices. For many scholars, theologians, and longtime followers, Hagee's admission meant far more than a passing comment. It wasn't just a moment of reflection or a preacher rethinking old ideas. It signaled a deep shift in how he understood faith itself. For decades, Hagee had been known as a firm voice in Christian teaching, preaching with certainty and absolute conviction. But over the years, something changed. His words now pointed to a different truth, that faith isn't rooted in knowing everything, but in trusting the mystery of God's plan. To many in the congregation, this honesty was surprising and deeply moving. Hearing such a prominent leader admit that faith involves surrender, not certainty, felt both humbling and liberating. It reminded believers that even those who teach about God are still learning, still growing, still wrestling with the same spiritual questions as everyone else. Hagee's message became more than guidance for his church. It echoed as a lesson for future generations. Scripture, he suggested, wasn't meant to be a rigid book of answers, but a living story meant to be explored, questioned, and lived. This wasn't a loss of faith. It was a deepening of it. He no longer felt compelled to provide exact explanations for every spiritual mystery. Instead, he embraced the idea that true belief begins with trust. Trust in God's will, in divine purpose, and in the journey itself. For Hagee, this shift may have been the natural outcome of decades in ministry. After a lifetime of leading others, he now seemed to be seeking something quieter and more personal, not certainty, but peace. Perhaps this moment was as much about reconciling with himself as with his congregation. When the service ended, he simply stepped back from the pulpit with a calm, reflective expression. No dramatic finale, no fiery declaration, just a quiet wave, and the sense that something within him had changed. For those who witnessed it, the moment felt deeply human. It showed that even the strongest spiritual leaders walk their own paths of doubt, discovery, and transformation. It was a turning point, not only for John Hagee, but for anyone who has ever wrestled with the tension between certainty and faith. A reminder that real belief grows when we dare to question, to change, and to trust the mystery of God's love. I just kept reading the Bible. I didn't know what else to do. I kept reading, hoping it would go away. With that one line, Pastor John Hagee set off a wave of reaction across his church and far beyond. At 85, a man long known for preaching prophecy with absolute certainty was now pointing to the mystery within faith itself. For someone of his influence, this wasn't a small shift. It was a moment that challenged longtime followers, religious thinkers, and even political observers. At Cornerstone Church, where thousands have listened to him for decades, many were stunned. Some felt comforted by his honesty. One member said, "Hearing him admit he doesn't have all the answers makes me feel less alone. Faith is trusting, even when you don't understand." For others, his softer tone revealed a side of him they had never seen, more reflective, more human. Supporters online echoed similar feelings. "He has inspired me for 25 years, one wrote. Another added, "His passion for Christ is undeniable." His words also sparked discussion among pastors and theologians. A young minister remarked, "Hagee has always been a symbol of certainty. Hearing him acknowledge ambiguity teaches us that humility belongs at the heart of leadership. Scholars agreed, noting that his shift showed theological maturity, a move from absolute assertions toward embracing the complexities of faith. To many, Hagee's message became more than personal reflection. It reminded believers that faith isn't about having control or perfect clarity. It's about searching, questioning, and learning to accept what cannot be fully understood. That idea resonated especially with younger Christians. One attendee said, "It showed me it's okay not to have every answer. Faith is a journey, not a finish line." Even in political circles, where Hagee has long been a powerful voice through Christians United for Israel, his change in tone raised new questions. Some wondered whether this shift might influence how religious authority is used in public life. Still, one thing remained clear. Regardless of debate, Pastor John Hagee continues to be one of the most influential figures in modern Christianity. His sermons, books, and advocacy have shaped millions. But perhaps his most important lesson came with this unexpected moment of vulnerability. At 84, he reminded everyone that even the strongest pillars of faith must eventually face uncertainty, and that humility, more than certainty, may be the truest expression of belief.